Hey, what's up? My name's JM Chaley and welcome to my channel. This week I want to talk about writing immortal characters. And this question, this kind of exercise came to me when I was doing my interview on Page Rebels, which is a podcast by Laurie Thorne, where she interviews other authors and checks out what they've got going on. By the way, if you want to check out Page Rebels, it's a really cool podcast. It's available on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. But she asked me a question about The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, which was what my interview was about. And by the way, The Unlife of Lisa Cooper is available right now wherever books are sold. If you want to check out a great story with a vampire protagonist who is maintaining the remnants of the woman that she was in life, but sacrificing power due to a vampire her age to do so. And the question is, will she have enough power to protect the ones that she loves as she faces the dark forces of the supernatural world? Check it out, ebook, hardback, paperback. But she was asking me a question about The Unlife of Lisa Cooper in terms of language. You know, how does she talk? Is she, using jargon from the 1800s? Is she detached from language and that sort of thing? How does she stay current? And I thought, that's a great question. How many times have we seen in fantasy fiction some immortal being, or maybe not even immortal, but long-lived? Maybe it's fantasy, maybe it's an elf or something like that. But, I'm writing urban fantasy, so I'm thinking of things in modern day, the earth, modern times, but someone that maybe has been around for a couple of hundred years. What are they like? So I thought this might be a good exercise. If you're writing a character like this yourself, or if you plan to write a character like this yourself, if you have something like that going on, how do you write an immortal character? I feel like, when we watch them in movies, they always seem so detached, right? We always get the detached immortal person. I've been around 100 years, and I can't even relate to a human anymore. I'm over here. I'm in this other space over here, and my mind is wherever, and I've since forgotten what it was like to listen to rock and roll music and eat cheese directly out of the refrigerator. Whatever, right? They're just completely detached, and I thought, is that how it would be? So let's get into it. I have a couple of ways to look at it, which I think at least work for me. Maybe they'll work for you. So I think when we talk about an immortal character, you have to ask yourself three questions. The first question is, does this character want to keep up with the times? Right? In other words, they see a new trend. Are they likely to say, I really need to get in with that and understand it, embrace it, so that I can kind of blend in? Or for whatever reason, I want to stay current, I want to stay trendy. Whatever their motivation is, do they want to stay with the times? The second question you ask is, can they stay with the times? Is this person isolated? Are they hundreds of years old living on an island somewhere? They're completely detached from wherever. They don't even know that the internet exists. That sort kind of a situation. And then the third question is, how accessible are the trends to your character? So in other words, for me, for example, all right, I have a son who's 20 years old. I'm in my 50s, right? I would love to stay current with the times as much as I care to. But you know what? I'm not in chat rooms with 20-year-olds, listening to how they talk. And every now and then my son will say something to me, and it's slang from Gen Z, and I'm like, what does that word mean? Because I don't know. This stuff isn't accessible to me, regardless of how much I'd love to understand the Gen Z slang and the dialect that my son is speaking. It's not like he's speaking a different language, but, he had to explain to me what yeet meant years and years ago, because guess what? I'm not in the place where there's a bunch of people my own age using that word, right? How accessible are the new trends fashions, language, whatever, slang to your immortal character? Despite their best efforts, are they able to keep up with it? Are they exposed to it? So let's start basic. Before we start thinking about like, oh, what would it be like to be 200 years old or 1,000 years old and look at a human being and try to relate to the modern day 20-something-year-old whoever. Let's start with our parents, right? Because believe it or not, the small age difference between us and our own parents can be pretty wide, depending on how much your own parents chose to keep up with the times, had access to the times, right? The same three questions apply to them. Did they want to keep up with the times? Can they keep up with the times? Did they have access to all the different trends as things moved around, right? Those three questions apply to them. I remember being a teenager and listening to, heavy metal music of the day in the 80s, and my father coming in and thinking, this is awful. This is the worst music in the world, right? But guess what? The same thing happened with him. He'd be listening to the Beatles in the 60s, and his father came in and he was like, what the hell are you listening to? His mother hated Elvis. That's the kind of stuff that he grew up with. And it repeats itself. So now imagine your grandparents. My grandfather listened to Frank Sinatra and the Chattanooga Choo Choo and all that kind of stuff, right? And, what about your grandparents? How detached are they from your music, your fashion, your slang? They understand what you're doing and everything. Maybe they do. Some folk keep up with what's going on. But the gap grows the more the generations pass. And I think that's the challenge. So when you start thinking about a being that's hundreds of years old, use your own parents or even grandparents as a template for how different they are. And then you start thinking about terms of like, look at someone in their 90s and 80s. Are they necessarily detached from humanity? No. And a lot of times, I remember like my great-grandmother, when she was around, she was hilarious because she never lost that spark. She never lost that youth that was inside of her. But that was her choice. I mean, she may have dressed like it was still the 1940s or the 1950s, but she never lost that sense of humor. She never lost that need to connect with family and friends and that sort of thing. And that's a big deal. So maybe you surrender to some things. You don't keep up with the music or the fashion, but you stay on top of other things. Figure out where your immortal character may want to do whatever and where they care. Is fashion important to them? Is music important to them? They need to blend in. They need to walk among a modern day crowd and look like the age that they appear to be, or act like the age that they appear to be, among people that look the same age as them. One of my favorite tropes among the immortals is that when you think about like characters that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and despite their best attempts, there's something always falls through the cracks. So maybe they choose to stay abreast of fashion and music, slang, pop culture, and everything like that. And then someone hits them with something and they're like, what? I wrote a scene where Lisa went to this guy's house and she was going to feed from him. And this dude actually lived in his parents' basement. And she goes down there and he's got posters on the wall, like from anime, manga. But I didn't really specify what they were from or, what actual show it was. But and she was completely unaware of this whole like subculture of anime, manga, and all that kind of stuff, that whole fandom. And he's explaining stuff to her, and she's just like, is this something I need to learn? Do I need to keep abreast of this stuff too? Lisa will keep up with fashion. That's a big deal. She wants to look like she is in her 20s, right? She dresses like she's in her 20s, so she always stays current with the fashions that are out in that time period. You know, she dressed like a flapper in the 1920s, even though she was from the 1800s. You know, and sometimes the fashions that she wears, you know, might be like, oh, this is the trend. Okay, you know, I'm a little uncomfortable dressing like this, but she moves through the time. One of the things that she struggles with is music. And I chose music because I feel like as just regular people, we tend to get to a point in our own musical taste where we kind of stop, right? There's a few exceptions, but there's so many people I know that complain, oh, after the 80s, nobody made good music anymore. After the 90s, there were no good music anymore. We all know people like this, right? We've heard people talk like this, right? My father insists that good music stopped after the 1970s, right? So, with some exceptions. But, you know, that's your generation kind of going, yeah, I'm done with music, okay? I like what I like. It's changed too much. I'm out. You know, there are exceptions, like, you know, my mother likes Snoop Dogg, you know. She stays current with music. She's a music lover in many ways that a lot of people her age are not. You know, I listen to a lot of music that my son listens to because he exposes me to stuff, and I'm like, okay, I like this, you know, and I stay current in music. Most people don't. So music is another way you can take your immortal character and show their age despite the facade that they're putting out. You know, especially if you read The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, there's a couple of scenes where she just complains about music. She does it in Conviction, the first book. She does it in The Vampires of 1863. I do have a short story I'm working on right now. There'll be more of that later, but she's complaining about music then as well. And that's always kind of like her little theme, her little go-to of, I'm keeping up with the fashion and all this other stuff, but goddamn the music. And she eventually catches up, right? You know, like I think when I talk about The Unlife of Lisa Cooper, she's talking about, oh, you know, Benny Goodman movie rolling over in his grave. Well, Benny Goodman was prominent in the 1930s. In the 1930s, she didn't like jazz. She was still lamenting the death of ragtime or whatever she was listening to in the early 1900s. You know, and in the early 1900s, she didn't like that music either. So she's like 2 or 3 decades behind her own musical taste, and sometimes that trips her up. So I think the last thing is the whole idea of humanity. And I don't necessarily mean humanity like a moral compass, right and wrong. I'm talking about a being that has become so old that they truly do lose their ability to relate to humans. And when I say humans, I mean it more the sense of detachment than apathy. But maybe your character does become apathetic. Maybe they become numb to it. Maybe they don't care. It depends on your character's choices and their proclivities to be, you know, a good person or not, or have empathy for others. You know, those are choices. I mentioned before, I'm in my 50s. You know, if I look at someone who's 12 years old and having drama over what they might be upset about in middle school, I'd probably roll my eyes and be like, oh, please, you know, that's ridiculous, you know, because I'm detached from it. It's not that I don't care. It's not that I wouldn't have sympathy or empathy for a person, but I would look at it and think, well, you don't realize how petty that is. It's so small. You're only 12, you know, and I have to put in an effort to kind of release myself from the adulthood that I've had, the life experience, and think, okay, well, it's important to this person at the time. It still is important to them right now. You know, those are key elements of being a parent, is being able to let go of all the things you've learned a little bit and just be there in the moment for someone who's having a hard time. That's empathy. That's choice. You know, how many times can you remember when you were a child and you'd be upset about something? An adult would say to you something dismissive. Oh, please, you know, that stuff doesn't matter. You know, just wait until you're older. That's going to be, you know, that doesn't help you, right? Now imagine you're hundreds and hundreds of years old and you're listening to some 60-year-old worry about their retirement. And you're thinking, retirement? Oh, you have no idea what it's like. You know, why don't you sleep on a pile of money like I do? You know, or whatever, you know. You could look at the lamentations of anybody, of any age, any mortal being, whether they're 90 years old or whatever, and scoff at it and be like, you know, ridiculous, the things you worry about. Does your character have enough empathy to kind of roll back their own clock and go, well, yeah, I kind of remember what it was like, and I can appreciate what you're going through, and show empathy for these people. Look at humans and care, give a damn. That's a choice about what kind of a person this immortal character is. So when you see these immortal characters going back to like the movies, we show these detached, you know, I'm hundreds of years old and humans, and I'm just this, you know, apathetic, sterile, emotionally sterile being. You know, that's a popular trope, but that was a choice. At some point, they made a choice. When they left those years behind, when they became 90 years old, 100 years old, and they still could be around humans that were not that much younger than them, you know, they made a choice to separate. Did your character do that? So think about that. Think about the three questions. The three questions being, do they want to stay current? Can they stay current? And how accessible are the trends that they need to stay current with? How accessible are those trends to the character? All right, so that about wraps it up. Immortal characters, there's a couple of ways to do it. There's a bunch of things to consider. These guys don't have to be emotionless drones that just kind of like preside over, you know, their observations of humanity and scoff at it and just are completely detached and apathetic. You know, they could give a damn. That's one of the exercises I loved, you know, when I came up with the idea of Lisa Cooper, is I didn't want her to be that kind of an immortal. I wanted her to still be attached to humanity, to have empathy for humans, to give a damn. You know, despite her age, you know, she's over 180 years old at this point. I wanted her to still be able to laugh and dance and befriend humans. You know? Well, I mean, why not? I mean, how boring would an immortal life be if you couldn't enjoy the company of others around you? I mean, even if you were an introvert, right? Shit, I mean, occasionally hang out with some people, or at least go on the internet and relate to the people you're dealing with online. Alright, so if you like this video, please give it a like, and as always, please subscribe. You can follow me on social media. I have a whole bunch of links. They're down in the description. Check them out. You can also check me out on jmchaley.com. Send me a message. I'd love to keep in touch. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.